Hey everybody, welcome. Very excited to have you here. If you can hear me, if you can see me, let me know. Tonight's going to be really special for anybody who has had anxiety at a high level, anybody who's been trying to deal with anxiety through the more traditional means, and also anybody who's been really actively trying to figure out a way to handle anxiety on their own. And what you've really been craving is like a very, very clear, practical, common sense, step-by-step, full method. This is also going to be very relevant for anybody who's been in our audience for a while. I mean, you could be brand new as well, of course, but especially if you've gotten lots of value from the little bits and pieces of the content that we've put out over the years, but you've really wanted to know basically from start to finish, how does it work? How does the methodology work? And what do you really need to put into place piece by piece by piece in the proper order? I'm going to be walking through that today. So basically the entire motivation for tonight is I'm going to try to basically reveal all of the secrets, or as many as I can fit into the time that I have. And I'm going to go into as much detail as I can, but I also want to keep things comprehensive so that, I don't overwhelm you with information, because the process of overcoming anxiety really is not that complicated. It's not really all that overwhelming. It's just if this is the very first time that you've gotten exposed to every step, it might feel a little bit like a lot for you, but that's why we've got the replay available. You can go through it as many times as you need, okay? And my intention was to literally give away as much as I possibly can fit into the time that I have. And my team was even a little reluctant of me doing this because they thought I was giving away too much. But what I know is one of two things is going to happen. A lot of you guys are going to take this exact full plan. You're going to take detailed notes, and you're going to implement it. And as you implement it, you're going to see some, really amazing results. And even if you don't become a client of mine, it's still a win for me because I get to rest easy at night knowing I helped you out. And then you might also refer other people to myself and my team. You might refer some of our free content out to other people. So, what goes around comes around. It's all still a good net benefit. And then some of you guys are going to go through this. You're going to take notes and you're going to go, you know what? I really get this now. It really makes sense to me. I understand it. But I would still like some help making sure I implement it correctly. And I want to make sure I get it, I get it implemented quickly, correctly, and then I've got someone making sure that I'm doing it right. And that's where, of course, we can step in and help you, and I can work with you directly one-on-one if that's what you want. But I'm going to give you everything you need to really tackle this on your own. So again, if you can see me, if you can hear me, let me know. We've had some audio and video issues in the past. Go ahead and put yes in the comments if you don't mind. Any questions at all, go ahead and put them in the comments. I see some people are joining us live right now. I'll answer questions towards the end if I have time. All right, so this is, as I mentioned, perfect for anybody who's got anxiety at a high level, especially if you've done not so well with therapy medications, or if you're the type of person that's really been hungry for answers. You've been Googling a lot, looking on podcasts, looking on YouTube videos, trying to figure this out, and you really can't figure out what is the start to finish process you need. So here's the thing. I'm going to start in the basics, and then we'll go a little bit layer by layer and double click on it. Okay, so the method that has kept me anxiety-free for 18 years and counting is the one that I've refined and developed and shared with almost 600 clients at this phase in my career. And it has worked incredibly well for them. And I'm not saying it's the only way to get the job done, but it's the only way I know how to get the job done, if that makes sense. And I feel pretty confident that if you're going to really overcome anxiety, you're going to have to do these three phases, these three kind of big picture steps. So I'm going to go through the phases real quick, and then I'm going to break down each one in detail because there are steps in each one. Okay, so the three phases. Number one is we have to deal with the anxiety at the moment by moment level. Another way of saying that is we have to give you the tools so that you can control how you're thinking, how you're feeling, and how you're acting moment by moment. Think of this as like the short-term issue and the short-term solution. So whenever we work with a client in their first 30 days, our priority is making sure that they can reduce their anxiety by at least 25%. And there's a certain set of tools that's needed to make that happen. It really has to do with what we call brain retraining. Okay, so I'll come back to that in a second. So that's phase one. Phase two is you must deal with the root cause of the anxiety. So after we've established a strong base, after we've given you the ability to feel some quick wins and some immediate anxiety reduction, so that way you're feeling more in control basically in all areas of your life, and the entire process of getting the anxiety dealt with feels more manageable, then we got to make sure that we really deal with the root cause of the anxiety. We got to dig down deep, and it has to do with your subconscious, and it has to do with your what we call model of the world. Okay, again, I'm going to circle back to that here in a moment. And then the third and final phase is that we have to make sure that we create a customized relapse prevention plan for you. Okay, you have to have a customized bulletproof relapse prevention plan. There's really only 4 causes of relapse, and you need to make sure that you can safeguard against all 4 of those. Those are the 3 core steps. Those are the 3 core phases that we have done with almost 600 clients. It works like clockwork. Everyone has to get a little customization, but it really, really works. It takes about 10 to 12 weeks to do that in most cases, or right around 90 days. Okay, so now, let's take it a little bit of a step deeper. So now I'm going to go into each phase and break down the exact steps you need. Now, I'll be honest, you probably want to take some notes here. Okay. So phase 1. Phase 1 is you need to handle the anxiety at the moment-by-moment level. What does that mean exactly? What that means is that as you're going through your daily life, moment by moment, your mind is generating feelings of anxiety. And what most people are aware of course, is that they're feeling anxious. They just don't really have a good sense as to how to actually control it, or even better, how to prevent it. They might use some standard coping mechanisms. So for example, they might breathe through it. They might, count. They might question a thought that pops up. They might use a little tool from one of their workbooks. They might do, something simple like that. They might try to go meditate. Okay. And there's nothing wrong with any of those things, but those are all coping mechanisms. And the problem with a coping mechanism is you're only ever going to be responding to the anxiety. You're never really going to be reducing it substantially and making sure that you're preventing it from occurring in the first place. I guess we could put it that way. So one of the key things that you've really got to learn how to do, is, at least it's what's worked for me and everybody else I know, is that we have to move from coping strategies to conditioning strategies. And what we have to do is we have to replace the automatic thoughts, feelings, and actions that your nervous system keeps involuntarily interjecting, I guess we could say, or activating, let's use that word. We have to basically replace each and every one of those tiny reactions with something different. So what we do is we do a little process in phase 1 that's called identify, interrupt, and replace. Identify, interrupt, and replace. So you want to think about your anxiety at this phase not as a permanent disorder, not as something that you're just destined to have for the rest of your life, not something that you have to inevitably just use coping mechanisms to deal with, but instead you want to think of your anxiety in a very key word, which is pattern. Okay, your anxiety is nothing but a collection of patterns. Now, what in the world does that mean? Well, if we take anxiety, for example, the thing about anxiety is that anxiety can only be activated in the nervous system if 3 specific things are taking place at any given time. Those 3 things combine to create a pattern, your specific, unique pattern of anxiety. Okay, so what creates a pattern of anxiety is, first of all, a pattern of focus. Secondly, a pattern of internal language or belief. Third, a pattern of physiology. So here's what you would want to do if you're going to take it on yourself to do this. And we typically take about 60 to 90 minutes with a client to do this, but here's a simple way that you can do this at home. You'd want to take a piece of paper. You'd want to divide that paper into 3 columns and 4 rows. So you have 3 columns, 4 rows. The top left box you'll leave blank. The top center box you'll label as anxiety. The top right box, you're going to label as your target state. And I would recommend just go ahead and do this with me as you're watching, as you're listening. So your target state is the feeling that you want to replace anxiety with. For most people, that would be something like content or confident. Content is the most common answer. People will tend to use words like calm or safe, peace, okay, things like that. But I highly recommend the word content, because calm and peace are a little bit paradoxical in nature. The more you try to feel them, the less you tend to feel them. Content is a little easier for us to work with, okay? So you've got your piece of paper. You've got the 3 columns. You've divided it into 3 columns and 4 rows. Top left box is blank. Top center box is labeled anxiety. Top right box, let's just go ahead and assume we've got the word content in there. And now what we need to do is we need to map out your nervous system's specific patterns that activate the feeling of anxiety and activate the feeling of content. So the way I typically do this with a client, and you can follow along and do this too, is you would want to isolate a specific memory, a moment in the recent past where you really felt anxious. Okay, so that's what you'd want to bring to mind. And then we need to answer 3 specific questions about that moment. Okay, the very first thing that we need to answer about that moment is, number 1, what were you focused on? Okay, now there's a couple different variations here. So as you're filling out your table, you're going to now jump down to the first blank row. So instead of the first row where you've got that those headers that I just said, you'd move down to the second row, the second blank row. In the left-hand box, you're going to put the word focus, because there's something that your nervous system is habitually focusing on in a very specific way that's causing you to feel anxious. And there's something that you can focus on. There's actually a series of patterns you can focus on that will create a feeling of contentedness. So let me explain. I know that may not make a lot of sense to you, but let me explain. It's actually far more simpler than you think. So what you'd want to do is bring, now that you've got your table sort of filled out, bring a moment where you were feeling anxious to your mind from the recent past. Okay? And here's what you want to ask yourself. First of all, what were you focused on? Let's start with some basics. Were you focused on the past, the present, or the future? Okay, and go ahead, put these answers in the comments if you don't mind, because the more you engage as I'm teaching you, the more you're going to get out of this. Okay, so were you focused on the past, the present, or the future? Now, for about 80% of you, it's going to be some version of the future. You might think it's the present, but it would actually be the future. So for some of you, say with like health anxiety, you think you're focusing on the present because you're really associated to the sensations in your body or something like that. But what you're actually doing is you're anticipating a moment in the future, maybe a moment where you might get sick or have a heart attack or something like that. For those of you who have panic attacks, anxiety attacks, social anxiety, again, you might think you're focusing on the present, but actually what you're doing is you're focusing on the future. You're focusing on, oh my gosh, am I going to have an anxiety attack? So you might be focused on the very near future, right? Like the next moment or two, but it's certainly focused on the future. Now, for those 2 examples, it usually happens in kind of a step 1 and a step 2. So with health anxiety, what you might be focusing on is you might be scanning your body looking for symptoms, step 1. And then step 2, you might then focus on a moment in the future where you worry about getting sick or dying, for example. If you have anxiety attacks, what is probably happening is you are focusing primarily on a moment in the future where you're worried about the anxiety level getting even higher. So basically you're getting anxious about getting anxious. If you are dealing with, say, OCD or something along those lines, similarly, your mind is again probably focused on some bad outcome occurring in the future. Okay, so what you'd want to write down, you'd want to go now into the box where anxiety crosses with focus. And you'd want to capture a couple bullet points. The first thing you'd want to capture is past, present, or future. For most of you, it's going to be future. Okay, and then the second thing you'd want to capture is what about the future were you focused on? And what I mean by this is you could have been focused on the future going how you wanted. You could have been focused on something you would enjoy about the future, something that would be fun, something, a precious memory or moment you would have with a loved one. But no, you were focused on, more than likely, something you feared taking place in the future. So the classic pattern that almost all people with anxiety are experiencing inside their nervous system is what we call future plus fear. And what I want you to understand is that the human nervous system can only really feel the feeling of anxiety if you're focused on the future that you fear, a vision of the future that you fear. Now, there's a lot of variations inside of that, but that's sort of the core. So even if I took somebody off the street, someone who doesn't even feel like they have anxiety, someone who feels very happy, very peaceful the vast majority of the time, if I took them off the street and I sat them down and I said, hey, think about a moment in the future going really, really badly, they might have a tough time. But if I painted a very particular picture, if I said, like, I want you to imagine driving your car and getting in a car accident, okay, they would start to feel anxious. Their heartbeat would start to rise. They would feel tension. They might start to sweat, okay, all those sorts of things. So the human nervous system gets anxiety activated by us doing these three things I'm walking you through right now. And you can learn how to train the brain to not do those things. Okay, so future plus fear is more than likely what you're going to put in that first box. The next thing you want to become aware of is your mind processing things visually? So were you visualizing that bad outcome taking place, having the anxiety attack, having a heart attack, whatever it is for you? Do you process it visually, yes or no? Okay, for some of you, you think about it in terms of a movie, and that's important to know, and I'll show you why. For many of you, probably about 1/3 of you, you would say, no, I don't really think about it visually, but I do hear dialogue inside of my mind, okay? It's just important to know that. So in that first box, you want to capture future plus fear, and then are you creating a movie or a picture in your mind of some kind? Okay, just capture that in that first box. Okay, that's the important thing. Now, the next thing that happens that creates anxiety is we're going to jump down one more row, and we're going to put language as the label for that next row. Okay, language. And so what happens in a moment when your nervous system is feeling anxiety is it's not just focusing on something particular that makes you feel anxious, it's using very particular language. And so there are key phrases, key words that when you use them inside of the mind or you use them out loud, they create anxiety. So what I'll do with my clients very often is I'll have them isolate what that specific memory was where they were feeling anxious, and I'll get them to isolate what exactly were they focusing on, what pictures were they making in their head, what movies were they playing, what exact vision of the future was it that they had, okay, that sort of thing. We'll cover that first. And then the next thing I will ask them is I'll say, what were you saying to yourself inside of that moment when you felt anxious? And that's the next key question that you want to answer. What specifically do you say to yourself when you're feeling anxious? And for about 60%, maybe a little more than that, of the population, you have particular internal dialogue that you use on a habitual basis. And for most people, you have about 5 or 6 key words or phrases that are go-tos, basically like habits, right? Remember I said this is all patterns that your mind uses that make you feel anxious. So what we're doing by mapping all this out, this is what we call pattern mapping. Pattern mapping. Because if we want to break the habit of your nervous system feeling anxious, we first of all have to identify all of the little micro patterns that are causing you the issue, and then we can start to replace it. So if we know, for example, that your mind visualizes getting in a car accident and you play it like a movie and you play it in color and you play it over and over again, then what we can do is we can start to retrain the brain to no longer create that movie in the mind. And when it no longer creates that movie in the mind, you won't feel anxious. Similarly, if we identify each one of the words and phrases that your mind habitually uses, okay, we call those incantations, then we can basically identify all of the buttons that you didn't even know that you were pressing inside of your brain that are making you feel anxious. We can identify them. Then we can interrupt the brain when it's activating that pattern, if you will, in real time, and we can replace it with something else. We can train the brain to have a new automatic pattern. That's where things become really cool. So, obviously, I'm doing a training here to a large group of people, hundreds and thousands of people, so I can't isolate what your exact thing is. But what I can do is I can tell you what the most common core language patterns are, and there's a very high likelihood that you're using some of these, okay? So the first one is the word can't. Can't is actually the number one anxiety-inducing word in the human language. So there's a big chance that when you feel anxious, you're saying to yourself that you can't do something. I can't do this, I can't function, I can't go to the store, something like that. So If that's true for you, you'd want to write that in the anxiety language box. Okay. The next word is the word try. Try is one of the highest anxiety-inducing words in the human language, because what it does is what try means is I'm going to put forward energy, but I'm not going to get the result, and that creates anxiety. All right. So try is another one. The third one is the word should. So I should do this, I should do that, I know I shouldn't beat myself up, I know I should clean up the house, da 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 da. Should creates a sense of expectation, it creates a sense of heaviness, it creates a sense of I'm not good enough. Should is one of the most anxiety-inducing words in the human language. Fourth is the phrase have to. I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to do this. Okay, we don't want to use that. The fifth one is the phrase what if. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if it's rainy outside? What if the store is crowded? What if people are bad drivers? What if I am sick? Okay, whatever the version is. The next one, and I really want to have you underline and underscore this one, because this one is probably the most anxiety-inducing phrase. Okay, can't is the most anxiety-inducing word, but the most anxiety-inducing phrase in the human language is going to. So, for example, I'm going to have a heart attack. I'm going to get in a car accident. I'm going to get laughed at the party. Whatever the case is. Okay, some sort of declarative statement about how the future is going to go a bad way. If you have anxiety, and it's more than likely that you are using some type of language that encompasses some of those six. Let me know in the comments which one for you fits. So what you want to do at this stage is you have already isolated exactly what you focus on that makes you feel anxious in the previous step. What you now want to do is isolate what specific language triggers you to feel anxious, what words, what phrases. And again, you want to identify, most people have 3 to 6. So you want to identify what those are for you. And the ones I just gave you, more than likely you've got something like that, or you have sentences that you say regularly that are built around those words and phrases. So you want to isolate those. The next thing you want to isolate is that if you do have internal dialogue that triggers you to feel anxious, then that dialogue is occurring in a very particular volume and a very particular tone. And the volume and the tone for the majority of people is what will create more anxiety for you than even the words. So what I do with my clients is I'll help them isolate those exact words. I'll say, what were you saying to yourself in that moment? We'll write them down. And then what I'll do is I'll have them fire each one of them off. So I'll say, okay, say this phrase to yourself and tell me 0 to 10, how anxious does it feel? So we'll go through those like 5 or 6, and they'll say, this one makes me feel an 8. This one makes me feel a 6. This one makes me feel a 5, blah, 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 blah. So that way we can create an order of priority of which patterns of language need to be replaced as the highest priority. What I'll also do is I'll say, okay, great, make the phrase, make the sentence inside of your mind twice as loud. Does that make it worse or better or the same? Most people, an increase in volume makes it worse. There is a small section of the population, though, where bringing the volume down actually makes the anxiety level worse. Okay. Next, what I'll do is I'll have them shift the tone. So for most of you, the tonality of your internal language is something like, I can't do it, I can't do it, I just can't do it, right? It's very quick, it's a very fast tempo, it's a very sort of labored, tense tone, okay? The thing is that you actually can train the brain to speak to yourself in a different tone and a different volume. It's actually pretty amazing. So one of the strategies I will use on this very first session with my clients is I'll say, great, take that phrase that is the most anxiety inducing for you. And let's figure out, are you susceptible to volume and tone? Okay, great. We know that higher volume makes it worse, and this particular tone makes it worse. Then what I'll do is I'll say, great, try that same phrase inside of your mind with like a cartoon voice, like a Mickey Mouse voice, for example, and that will make them chuckle. And I'll have them do that a handful of times. And what that does is it breaks the pattern inside the nervous system. It causes your nervous system to think that that old pattern is now silly and ridiculous instead of true. What I'll also do is I'll say, great, imagine there's a volume knob out in front of you. Grab that volume knob and turn it down and bring the internal dialogue of the voice down. And I'll have them practice that like 4 or 5 times. And what they'll realize very quickly is that they can turn the volume of their internal dialogue down whenever the hell they want. It's just not a skill that they've ever been shown that they can do. So you actually have the ability to influence your dialogue in 3 levels. Number 1, you can specifically remove words from your vocabulary and replace them with words that empower you. Number 2, you can train yourself to have a different volume in your internal dialogue. Number 3, you can change the tone. All 3 of those are what comprise that second part of your specific anxiety pattern. So first, it's what you focus on specifically. Second, it's what language you use with yourself habitually. So if we map out exactly what those are, it's like mapping out all of the buttons in your brain that you didn't even know you were pushing that make you feel anxious. And then we do this exact same process for the target state column that you want, feeling content, which is really cool. The third and final piece of the pattern is physiology. Okay, so the body and the mind are one machine. And what most people think is they think that they don't have a lot of control over how they feel, but in actuality, they're using their physical body in a very particular way that triggers them to feel anxious emotionally. There are 5 or 6 major patterns that people will develop that they don't even realize. So the label for that final row is physiology. And if we move over to the anxious physiology box, what we now want to isolate is what do you do with your physical body that makes you feel anxious. So again, I'll do this with a client on a session, and I'll say, in that moment that you picked recently where you were feeling anxious, we now know what you were focusing on. We now know what language you were using with yourself. But what were you doing with your physical body? So I'll ask them, how were you breathing? And that's usually the easy one. People will usually say shallow and fast. And then I'll say, okay, were you more hunched over or more upright? And almost always they were more hunched over. Then I'll say, were you tensing any of your muscle groups? They'll say yes, usually the jaw, the neck, the shoulders, hands. Okay, those are common examples. Fourth, I will ask them, what were you doing with your face? They'll say, I was frowning and I was tensing my jaw, usually. Then I will say, fifth, did you have any unique movements that you were doing with your body? Like, were you fidgeting? Were you pacing? Were you pulling tugging on your hair? Anything unique like that? Usually people have one unique movement that they also do that creates anxiety. So once we map all those out and someone tells me exactly what they were doing in that recent moment when they were feeling anxious, then what I'll do is I'll ask them, okay, well, how anxious do you feel in this moment right now, 0 to 10? And they'll say something like, I'm not really feeling very anxious on this call right now, maybe like a 2. And I'll say, okay, now what I want you to do is I want you to recreate that physiology. Okay, so go ahead and breathe shallow and tight, hunch yourself over, start fidgeting your hands that way, tense your neck up. Okay, do all those things really quick. And then tell me 0 to 10, how anxious do you feel? And they always say like 8, 9, or 10 as soon as they do that. And notice I haven't even told them to think about anything. I haven't told them to tell themselves anything. I just have them activate their physiology. And as they activate their physiology, everything changes. So basically what we do is we fill out this whole pattern of what exactly do you have to focus on that makes you feel anxious, what language do you have to use to make you feel anxious, and what are the 5 unique physiological triggers that are making you feel anxious. And what I'll show people how to do is how to snap out of each one of those key patterns. So that's where things become really cool. And then what we do is we do the exact same process, but for the target state that they feel, or that they want to feel. So if someone tells me I really, really want to feel content, I will say, great. When was a time in your life when you felt really content? And most people say, oh, I've never really felt content. And I'll say, that's not true. You've at least had one moment, like a day where you felt content. And so people will pick something. And then I'll say, great. Close your eyes, put yourself back in that moment as best as you can, and let's unpack it. Let's figure out what your nervous system was doing differently in that moment. First of all, what were you focused on? And for most people, I'll tell you, if you're trying to feel content, There's 2 key ways you can do it, and you can put this in the content focus box. Number 1, you can focus on a vision of the future that you actually desire. So basically imagining the future going how you want it to go. Number 2, you can focus on what you appreciate in the present as opposed to what you dislike, for example. Okay, and then we'll go to the language part. And here it's different for all sorts of people, but usually people will have some version of this is. So like this is nice, this is good, this is great, this is whatever. Okay, and notice it's a declarative statement. You're saying to your brain, this is how it goes. Okay, so that's a very important thing that you can do with language. There's also a very different tone, a very different volume. Usually the volume is quieter. The tone is more upbeat, more positive. Third, with physiology, it's basically the opposite of all of those things. The person is smiling, they're breathing more deeply, they're holding themselves more upright, all of those things. So I'll take about 10 minutes and I'll walk through that exact process with a client, and we'll identify the 6 to 10 key triggers that make them feel content. And then here's the really cool thing. I will then have them activate all of those things. I will have them focus on something they would like to see happen in the future. I'll have them use the exact same language that they used before. I'll have them do the same thing with their body that they did before. And every time they're able to feel content and happy in a moment's notice. Then I show them that they can snap out of the anxiety and they can get into feeling content whenever they want. I show them that they can actually go back and forth between the emotional states. And this is what helps people realize that anxiety is not a disorder. It's not a thing that you're out of control of. Well, let me back up. It is something you are out of control of currently, but it's not something that you will inevitably always be out of control of. It's just that you've never learned the tools. You've never learned the skills. And so that's what we help people do. That's really the very first key phase. The only final part is that I will usually give people what we call the rumble strip. Okay, the rumble strip is a very simple, tactical way to apply all of this information. So basically what I'll have them do is I'll have them grab a tiny slip of paper, or we actually give each of our clients a background they can put on their phone, so that way it's easy for them. They can see it whenever they need to. And on that piece of paper or on their phone background, they're going to write down 3 key questions. The first question is, what am I going to choose to focus on? The second question is, what am I going to choose to make this mean? Third, what physiology am I going to choose? And we have them put that on a piece of paper. I have them put that piece of paper in their pocket. And then as they go through their day, I have them, whenever they remember the piece of paper is there, or whenever they look at their phone, to stop and pause and ask themselves those 3 key questions. So they might be in the middle of a meeting at work. They might be feeling anxious because they've got to present. They go to the bathroom. They notice that the piece of paper is in their pocket. They pull the piece of paper out and they go, oh my gosh, what am I going to choose to focus on? Oh, well, I was just imagining the meeting going really badly. I'm going to choose to focus on the meeting going really well. I'm going to make a picture of it in my mind. What am I going to choose to make this mean? Well, what I was just telling myself is that I'm going to screw it up. Everyone's going to hate me, da-da-da-da-da. But what I'm going to choose to make this mean is I can do this. I will do this. And then, what physiology am I going to choose? Well, I was just breathing really tightly, hunching over, frowning. What I'm going to do is, let me straighten myself up. Let me change how I'm walking. Okay, so basically what it does is it causes you to break your own pattern 12 times a day, or however often you do it, usually about 12 times. And we call it the rumble strip because it's like driving on the road, and when you get out of the lane that you're supposed to be in the road, you hit the rumble strip. The rumble strip wakes you up. It causes you to get back in your lane. So your mind is drifting throughout the day, and it's drifting into areas where it's going to make you feel anxious. And so what we want to do is we want to have a physical trigger to cause you to wake up, to basically get you to get back in the appropriate lane. Now, after you do this enough times, you have now successfully interrupted your old pattern. So remember, it's identify, interrupt, and replace in this first phase. So we've identified every single micro pattern that makes you feel anxious, every single thing that causes it in your nervous system. We've identified exactly what micro patterns you need to replace it with. and then I interrupt it in real time and replace it in real time. And your nervous system literally starts to get rewired this way. Okay, so that's what we do in the very first week of the process. Now, weeks 2 through 4 is where we make it a little easier, but basically what we're doing is we're helping people integrate those core changes that I just described. Okay, so that's basically phase 1. And if you really want to get rid of anxiety, that's what you're going to have to do at a minimum. And that is enough. If you really truthfully, faithfully do what I just described, that alone usually is enough for people to reduce their anxiety anywhere between 20 and 40%. Just doing that very specific thing. As long as you do it right, you'll be able to do it. Okay. The next thing, phase 2, okay, that we want to do is we now have to deal with the root cause of the anxiety. So the short-term cause of the anxiety is that your nervous system is focusing in a certain way, it's using language in a certain way, it's using physiology in a certain way. Phase 2 is we got to dig down to the real root cause of the anxiety. So when we say the real root cause of the anxiety, what I mean by this is we have to make sure that we identify every single conflict that you have in your belief system. What does that mean? Let me explain. So here's the simple little metaphor that we give to our clients that works really well for them. I need some water. One sec. Okay. The very simple metaphor that we give to our clients is one that we call the game of life. Now, think about a board game, for example. If you have a board game, there's 2 core things about the board game that matter to you. Number 1, there are goals of the game, like there's a certain set of things that you need to accomplish. And then number 2, there are rules that you need to follow in order to make sure that you actually win and that you don't lose. Well, what's interesting is that we are all psychologically playing our own version of the game of life, so to speak. And there are only a handful of core games that people try to play. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is that some people have values where what they are chasing after is a particular feeling. So for example, one person, life might be about trying to be successful. And that person's number 1 top value is success. And if they are in a situation where they do feel that they are successful, they will feel happy. They will feel peace of mind. If they are in a situation, however, where their number 1 value, their number 1 priority is to feel successful, but they don't feel successful, they're going to feel anxious. And because their mind will be constantly striving for this thing that they really, really want, but that they don't feel that they've achieved. So this is where we get into what we call the archetypes. There are core archetypes that create anxiety, core models of the world. What that really means is core belief systems about who we have to be and what life is all about. The first archetype is what we call the achiever. So you might identify with this archetype. This would mean you have anxiety around achieving or whether you've achieved enough. You think a lot about success, career, wealth. It could also be, for instance, that you constantly measure and assess whether you are a good enough mom or father or something along those lines. You have always sought to do better and more and to excel and to not be average. And you've had a lot of anxiety around whether or not you're measuring up to the expectation that you need to abide by of being excellent. This usually comes from being in an environment growing up where one of your parents was difficult to please, and what they expected of you was to excel and be exceptional. Okay, another archetype is what we call the perfectionist. And this usually occurs if you grew up in an environment where a parent was tough to please, and it felt like they found a flaw in almost every single thing that you did. And what you then developed was a mental pattern of searching for flaws that don't exist, and you have perpetually been trying to meet this unmeetable expectation and win this unwinnable game of being perfect. The third one is playing the game of the pleaser, trying to be the archetype of the pleaser. And here, the game of life is all about accommodating and pleasing and never upsetting other people. And so you consistently try to anticipate what other people's feelings are, what other people think about you, what their opinions are of you, what their preferences are, and you try to contort yourself in response to what those other people need or want. Okay, we've got the achiever, the pleaser, the perfectionist. The next one is the caretaker. The caretaker is when your model of the world, your belief systems say that it is your job to take care of everybody else, that everybody else's problems are your problems, that it's your responsibility. This usually occurs when you grew up in an environment where you felt like you either had to take care of your parent or your parents or a sibling, like you had to be the adult in the family, or you had to be a protector of some kind. Okay, that's usually where that occurs. Those four are really the most common ones. The fifth one, actually, this one is very common as well. The fifth one is the archetype of what we call the controller. The controller occurs when usually some sort of unexpected, painful event occurs in life, and you basically say, holy cow, that event was really, really painful and really unexpected, and I never want to see that ever happen again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to control everything. I'm going to try to anticipate danger before it occurs, and I'm going to avoid uncomfortable or uncertain situations. And so life is predominantly for you about safety and security and control. So those are the most common ones. There are a couple other variations, okay? But, there's one other one that's coming to my mind right now, which is what we call the strong kid. The archetype of the strong kid is when you believed that you cannot show emotion. And by the way, if you haven't figured it out by now, all of these are problematic because all of these will be violated. So each one of these becomes kind of a core blueprint, basically, of what you think life is supposed to be like, and more importantly, who you think you are supposed to be. But here's where the problem occurs. And you want to make sure that you understand this next piece, because this is really important. The formula for peace of mind is when your life conditions match up with your model of the world. In other words, when your life matches up with your expectations about how it should be, you feel peace of mind, you feel happy. When there is a discrepancy between how life is and how you expect it to be, that's what creates anxiety. So in other words, if I have a model of the world that says I am meant to be an achiever, then I'm going to be happy and I'm going to feel peace of mind so long as I am achieving things. But if I'm not achieving things, or there are things that are in my way, or things are more difficult than I thought they would be, but my core belief is I must be achieving things or else I'm not good enough and life can't be good and I can't feel happy, well, now we've got a problem, right? If I believe that I have to be perfect, that model of the world is always going to get violated, right? It's never going to match up to my life expectations. If I believe I have to please everybody else, or else I can't feel good about myself, I can't be happy, I can't feel peace of mind, well, it is inevitable that I will not please everybody. That's going to clash with how life is. If I believe I've got to take care of everybody else's problems, that's not going to work from time to time. So there are these core belief systems that people develop without realizing they've developed, where they're trying to play a game of life that is unwinnable. Okay, and those are the core big ones that are most prevalent, most common. Okay, there's of course different variations of that. So for example, with the controller, you might be someone who really, really wants to control the stimulation that you're exposed to in social situations. And so you get very triggered and anxious in social situations because, surprise, surprise, you can't control what's going on in the external environment. Or if you are trying to control every little sensation that you feel in your body, you want to know with absolute certainty for sure that there's no chance that you have sickness in your body. Guess what? You're never going to be able to have 100% certainty. So you will perpetually have anxiety because your mind is trying to play this game that it just can't win. So it's basically like if I duct taped you to a chair, I made you play this board game basically, but the rules are rigged, right? There's no way for you to sustainably and consistently accomplish the goals. That becomes a real problem. That would be the ultimate anxiety-inducing situation. Does that make sense to you? I hope that makes sense to you guys, okay? And let me know in the comments which one of these archetypes do you resonate with. So if you are dealing with anxiety, especially if you've been dealing with anxiety for a long time, I can guarantee you it's because you've got problems in the level of your subconscious and your belief systems. And we have to deal with that. Because if somebody if the formula for peace of mind is that when your life conditions match up with your expectations, And your model of the world, your expectation says, I have to be perfect. Do you see how that is a recipe for you always perpetually feeling anxious unless we actually dismantle and eliminate the belief system that says you have to be perfect and replace it with something that is actually obtainable and achievable? That is what is really important and at the core of all of this. Okay, so this whole process takes about 3 to 4 weeks typically when we walk people through this. But I'm going to give you kind of the bare bones of what you really, really need to do. And I'm going to show you basically where the problem areas are so you can do some of this work on your own, or as much of it as you possibly can. Okay. So first, there's 6 key ways that we make the game of life more difficult. I'm going to walk you through all of these. This will help you understand where the problems are in your belief systems. Number 1, choosing difficult values. Okay, so for example, here's how you know if you've got difficult values. What you want to ask yourself is, what feeling am I craving to feel the most? Okay, and so again, for some of you it might be success. For some of you it might be perfect. For some of you it might be feeling safe. For some of you it might be feeling acceptance. Okay, all sorts of different stuff like that. So what feeling are you craving to feel the most? And you want to ask yourself that question 5 times. So you would go, okay, what feeling am I craving to feel the most? Acceptance. All right. Besides acceptance, what else am I craving to feel the most? Success. Okay. What else am I craving to feel the most? Certainty. Okay. Whatever your answers are. Get 5. Okay. Those 5 are the subconscious goals that you're having. Those are the things that your subconscious is chasing after on a regular basis. The next thing that you want to do, and it would be very challenging for me to describe how to, well, actually, no, it won't be. Let me just do it this way. So you get your list of 5, okay, and let's say we've got acceptance and success. Then what you want to do is you want to go, okay, which do I value more? Like, which one of these things do I chase after more? Which one do I obsess over more and think about more and prioritize my actions around? Acceptance or success? And you might go, acceptance. Like, I really want success, but I wouldn't really feel successful unless I got acceptance. Okay, and you just keep doing that to get them in the right order. So let's say your list is acceptance, success, and certainty, for example. Okay, well, we already know that your game is going to be a difficult one to win because, number 1, you're not going to get acceptance a lot of the time. Number 2, you're not going to feel certainty a lot of the time. Number 3, you can feel successful a good amount of the time, but it's not always going to be happening for you. You are definitely going to fail sometimes. You're going to have setbacks. So even before we go any further, we already know you're in store for anxiety just based off of the goals of the game that have been locked into your subconscious up until now. So that's the first big thing that causes a problem. So you can reduce anxiety by changing the goals of the game. That's the cool thing. So if you've been obsessed with acceptance for this whole time, you can decide that you're going to value something different that is actually much more obtainable. Okay, and you might be asking, well, what in the hell is that? What should I be focused on? What should I revolve my life around, if not what I'm used to revolving it around? Let me give you a hint. Okay, I've told you what the unwinnable games are. There are 4 winnable games. Okay, there are 4 kind of core winnable games. Okay, number 1 is the game of growth. Okay, it's easy to grow. You can grow in all sorts of ways, all sorts of shapes and sizes. It's in your control. You can do it every day. You can do it almost every single moment. So growth, if you prioritize growth, it's a winnable game. Number 2 is contribution. Again, it's in your control. There's lots of ways to do it. You can do it in almost every day. Well, you can certainly do it every day. You can do it almost every moment of every day in some kind of way. That's why contribution is a really good thing to value. Third is love and connection. But the importance here is being loving, not accepting to be loved. Right? Because again, we want to put you in charge of the game. Most of you are feeling anxious because you're not even in charge of your own freaking game. You're waiting on forces that are outside of your control to conform to your expectations. So what we want to do is rewrite the rules of the game, rewrite your belief systems so you get to be the one in charge of whether you win or not. So that's why love and connection is a winnable game. The 4th one is variety, which basically means like fun. Okay, lots of different ways to have fun. So, and you can choose different ones inside of that. So, for example, inside of growth, you might say, I'm going to value health. Okay, if you value health, that's a way of valuing growth, for example. Okay, so those are the winnable games. So the first thing that could be causing you issues is you have chosen difficult values, and you can choose better values, and that will make the game of life easier. The second thing that can cause anxiety at your core, in the deep recesses of your brain, is you can have your values in conflict with each other. So, for example, let's say you really, really want to feel success, but you also want to never, ever, ever feel like a failure. Well, those two things don't go together, because to succeed, you have to fail from time to time. Or let's say you really, really want to feel in love, but you never want to feel vulnerable. That's not going to work, because those two things have to go together, right? So what you very often might be experiencing, many of you feel tugged in one direction and then tugged in a different direction. And that tug back and forth creates anxiety, because it creates this feeling of I cannot win. So you have to resolve those conflicting values. That's a really important thing. Okay. The third thing that can cause you problems is having your values in a disempowering order. What does that mean? Well, let's say, for example, that I have on my list, I want to feel comfortable, number 1. I want to succeed, number 2. And I want to feel loved, number 3. So comfort, success, loved. Here's the problem with that. Number 1 is I will only allow myself to pursue success if I feel comfortable doing it. That sucks, because the only way I'm going to be successful is doing uncomfortable things a lot of the time. The other thing is that because comfort is number 1 and success is number 2 and love is number 3, I'm never really going to allow myself to feel good enough to receive love unless I first feel comfortable and I second feel successful. So the order is all screwed up. If I would put love at the top of my list, then now all of a sudden things could feel really cool, because I could imagine if I put love and then success and then comfort. Well, now I could say, you know what, the number 1 priority for me is being loving to myself. And that's going to make me feel a lot more motivated and excited to achieve and succeed. And then as I achieve and succeed, that's going to create a lot of comfort in my life. So sometimes we've got things out of order, right? And we've got to fix the order. It'd be like trying to play Monopoly, but you never have any money to start with. So how in the world can you... no, I'm sorry, let me back up. Let's say you're playing Monopoly, but the very first thing you have to do is have 3 matching properties. Before you even collect any money or buy any properties, you have to have a monopoly first. That would never work. You've got things out of order. Okay, so changing the order of things can sometimes change your entire life. That's why, think about one of your favorite movies. Movies are so good when the main character reorders their values, and that's what you can do as the main character in your own life story. Okay, so that's the third thing that can cause you problems. The fourth thing that can cause you anxiety is having too many rules. So what do we mean by rules? Rules is when you have requirements that have to be met in order for you to allow yourself to feel what you want to feel. So if I'm chasing after success all the time, that might cause me some anxiety unless I have good rules. So for example, if my rule for success is I just need to do my best. As long as I did my best, I am successful. Cool, that's a really easy game to win. But if my rules for success are I got to make $1 million a year, I got to be the leading expert in my field, I got to get a promotion every year, I need to get recognized by my boss all the time, Now all of a sudden we've got a situation where I'm going to have a lot of anxiety because I got a lot of rules. And the more rules you have, the more complicated your game of life is. The more complicated your game of life is, the less winnable it is. The less winnable it is, the more anxiety you feel. It'd be like playing chess versus playing checkers. Playing chess tends to induce more anxiety because there's more rules. Okay. Number 5, the fifth way that you can create a lot of pain and a lot of problems for yourself is having rules in conflict. So, for example, let's say I have a rule that says you only love me if you are the one who invites me out to lunch all the time. Well, I might also have a rule that says No, here, let me back up. That's not a great example. Here's a better example. Let's say I have a rule that says you only love me if you never disagree with me. And I might also have a rule that says you only love me if you call me out on my bullshit. Okay, well, now we've got a problem, right? Because now someone is inevitably going to be violating at least one of those rules. It's going to be problematic. Okay? So you can have rules that are in conflict with each other. The next thing that can become a problem, I think I'm on number 5 now, is you can have rules that rely on other people rather than your own actions. So that makes you feel like you're playing a game where other people are in charge of whether you win, not yourself. And then number 6 is you can have rules that inevitably are going to be violated. So for example, some people would say, I can only feel happy if it's sunny outside. I can only feel loved if people never raise their voice at me. I can only feel accepted if I'm never left out. Okay, well, those are things that are inevitably just going to freaking happen if you live on planet Earth. So you would never want to have rules that will inevitably be violated, because that means you're inevitably going to feel anxious. So what I do with clients, and what you can do with yourself, is I help them identify every single root cause of the anxiety that's been hanging out in their subconscious. And we use that checklist to systematically identify each one of the old beliefs that needs to get eliminated. Once we identify each one of the beliefs that needs to be eliminated, then what I do is I walk them through my belief eliminating process. That is like an 11-step process. So it takes like half an hour to explain. I'm not going to do that right now. But I can walk you through a simple little process that you can use. Okay. So let's say, for example, you identify what your old values are. You really identify what feelings you've been chasing after. You identify what the order is that you've been chasing after them. And you also identify what your rules have been for those values. So what specific requirements have you been holding on to that needs to happen for those values to be felt? Now what you need to do is you need to challenge and ultimately eliminate the beliefs that have caused you pain. So for example, let's say my values list is, I'll use the one I said earlier. So let's say I've got comfort number 1, success number 2, and acceptance number 3. 1 second. Need some more. All right. So comfort, success, acceptance. Well, the very first thing is all of a sudden I know that I've got some beliefs that are a problem. One belief is I must be comfortable all the time. That belief is evident because I've put comfort at the top of my list. So that's the very first type of belief that would be a problem. You valuing something is a type of belief because it's you saying this thing is of ultimate importance. So you might say, you might realize that you've held on to a belief that matches up with those archetypes I told you. Like, I have to please everybody or else I'm not good enough. I have to solve everybody else's problems or else I'm not good enough. I have to feel in control and certain of everything before it happens in order to live my life. What was another one? I have to be perfect or else I'm not good enough, etc. I have to be achieving things all the time or else I'm not good enough. So you could identify that first initial core belief, and you could challenge that. That would be the type of belief that we need to use this belief eliminating process on. The other type of belief would be your rules. So, for example, you might say, you might look at your rules and go, well, you know what? I've never really felt loved in the past except for when people are always nice to me. As soon as people, are having a bad day and they get snippy with me, I immediately don't feel loved. So I've held on to a belief that says that you only love me if you're always nice to me. And that belief causes me anxiety whenever people are in a mood, even when it has nothing to do with me. So you know what? The belief I need to get rid of is people only love me if they're always nice to me. Okay, that would be an example. Or another example might be that you have held on to a belief that says, I must be 100% totally sure that no sensation in my body has the potential to be a physical health problem. I have to know everything about my body. Okay, that would be a belief that needs to be challenged. So you basically get a big long list of all the beliefs that have caused you anxiety. And by the way, if you want a shortcut to figure out what those beliefs are, I'll tell you. Here's a shortcut. Think about all of the moments when you feel anxious on a weekly basis, like list them all out. So you might say, when I'm at the grocery store, when I'm driving, when I'm at work, when me and my partner argue, da 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 da. List out all the different situations where you feel anxious in a given week. And then ask yourself for each one of those, what would I have to believe in order to feel anxious in that moment? So if you're feeling anxious at the grocery store, you might say, what would I have to believe in order to feel anxious at the grocery store? And you might come up with something like, I can only grocery shop if there's less people in the store. Or you might go, okay, well, what would I have to believe in order to feel anxious when me and my partner have a disagreement? I guess I'd have to believe that people need to agree with me all the time, or else I can't stand it. See where I'm going? So you want to identify, you got to basically pluck all of these beliefs out of your subconscious and get them out on paper. And that in and of itself usually reduces a lot of anxiety, because sometimes just saying it out loud or getting it out on paper, you're like, holy shit, that's a ridiculous belief. I need to just let go of that right now. I don't even believe that that's true now that I can see it. Okay, so that's a really helpful process. But some of them are stickier. Some of those beliefs you're going to feel more certain about. And that's why we have to take a big shovel and go to the garden of your mind and pluck those weeds out with the shovel. Okay. And so I have a really, really intense shovel that I use to basically like eliminate beliefs for once and for all. There is one though that was developed by a woman many years ago. Her name is Byron Katie. It's pretty effective. It's pretty good. I'm going to share it here because it's just simpler and easier. Okay. So her process is basically you figure out what the belief is. So let's just say the belief is people can never disagree with me. Or excuse me, if people disagree with me, they don't love me. Let's use that. So then what you identify the belief, that's step one. Step two of eliminating the belief is you ask yourself, is that really true? Yes or no? Is it really true that people have to agree with me all the time or else they don't love me? And of course the answer there is no, right? The third question you ask is, can I absolutely know that that belief is true? As in, do I have 100% of the information necessary to know for sure that that belief is true? Well, in that situation, the answer again is no, because if someone's disagreeing with me, I don't absolutely know that they don't love me. They might just be disagreeing with me. I can't read their mind. I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not a wizard, right? So I don't know for absolute sure that they don't love me. My mind is making an assumption. And here's what you want to remember. Anxiety always comes from assumptions, always. Right? It's some sort of thing that your brain is assuming that is not necessarily true. The fourth step that you do is you ask yourself, who do I become when I believe that thought? So who do I become when I believe that people have to agree with me or else they don't love me? And that would make me feel sensitive and vulnerable and reactive and not very fun to be around and all sorts of nasty stuff. Okay. The fifth question you ask yourself is, if I never, ever, ever had that thought, if that thought never entered my mind, how would life be different? So how life would be different is I could feel confident even in situations where people disagree. My self-worth wouldn't be up for negotiation as much. My self-esteem would be higher. I would feel more confident. I would express my opinions more easily. I would not get angry at people so easily, etc., etc., etc. Okay? And then the final step is you do what's called a turnaround. The turnaround is you take the opposite of the old belief and you find 4 reasons to justify that it's true. So you go, all right, my old belief was if people disagree with me, they don't love me. And maybe the opposite, the truth is that if people really love me, they will feel comfortable disagreeing with me. And the reasons that would back that up is, number one, if they don't disagree with me, if they don't feel comfortable expressing their opinions, they don't really trust me enough. Number two, they must really love me because they know that if they express their opinions and I disagree with them, I might still be nice to them and loving to them. So that's a really good thing. Thirdly, every once in a while, I might be wrong and I might be holding on to an opinion that's hurting me. So if someone disagrees with me, there might be situations where they're being very loving to me because they're actually helping me out. They're helping me wake up from what I, am telling myself. Can you see where I'm going? And by finding those new reasons to support the alternative belief, you literally rewire the brain. You quite literally are creating new neural connections in the brain. You're creating a web of empowering beliefs, and you're dismantling the web of disempowering beliefs. So that's really the process that takes like a couple weeks, right? Because what I'll do is I'll have a client challenge and eliminate one limiting belief per day, and we'll do it over a period of time, right? And we'll start with the big heavy hitters so that they start feeling a lot of relief, and then we take care of the smaller weeds later. And a lot of them take care of themselves, because it's kind of like a house of cards. Like if you pull the big, the middle card out, the whole thing topples down. So we eliminate those old limiting beliefs. That's kind of step 2 of phase 2. And then the final step of phase 2 is we create a new set of beliefs. We create a new set of values. We create a new set of rules. And we base it off of making sure we don't repeat the same mistakes we did before. So instead of valuing certainty or trying to be good enough or trying to be perfect enough or achieve or take care of people's problems, maybe life now is about one of those other things like loving or growing or contributing. And then we come up with a new set of rules. A new set of rules like, okay, well, what are my rules for growth? And we make sure that those rules are super simple, super easy, and fully within your control. So someone might go from previously believing life is about certainty and safety, and the only way I can feel certain and safe is if everything goes my way, I'm never interrupted, and there are no surprises, and all these other things. And now they create a new model of the world, a new belief system that says, no, life is not about certainty. Life is about contribution. Life is not about me. Life is about giving to other people, and I can give to other people in all sorts of ways. I can smile at a stranger. I can call my kids. I can do something loving for my wife. I can do this. I can do that, right? And so now, instead of a game where there's too many rules, the goals are out of whack, the goals are hard to accomplish, the goals are in conflict with each other, the rules are in conflict with each other, the rules are inevitably going to be violated, we now rewrite the rules of the game. We totally give you a new game of life. We give you a new way of interacting with life where it is a very, very winnable process, something where the goals are very achievable, the goals are in the right order, there's not a lot of rules, the rules are all aligned with each other, and more importantly, you are in charge of being able to win. And that's what makes things really, really cool. And that's what really vaporizes anxiety at the core level. But you can't skip that step because it's that important. Okay, so that concludes phase 2. And we're on to phase 3. And phase 3 is the simplest and the easiest and the fastest. And phase 3 is really about making sure that you create a custom relapse prevention plan. Because remember, at this point, we've already done phase 1. So we've already identified all of the little internal micro patterns that make you feel anxious. And we've interrupted it. We've basically kept your brain from going into that automatic pattern. It's kind of like scratching a CD in a jukebox. If you scratch the CD enough times, the CD cannot play the same way. It gets ejected. And then we replace it with new automatic thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. That's phase 1. Phase 2, we dig down deep. We find every single internal subconscious belief that has caused you anxiety ever in your life, and we systematically pluck those weeds out of the garden of your mind. We literally eliminate those beliefs by systematically challenging the assumptions that you made a long time ago and that have been hanging out in the back of your brain. Then we replace those limiting beliefs with ones that empower you. Okay, and we do it piece by piece, and we condition them so that you really feel them in your bones, and you finally feel in charge of your life again. And that's what enables us to move to phase 3. Phase 3 is really about maintenance and making sure that you are the one that can carry the torch forward, that you're not going to have to rely on a therapist or a coach or me or anybody to maintain good mental health, but that you really are the one in charge. And to do this, there's only a couple things you need to do. Really, really simple. Okay, we've really narrowed it down to a science over the years. Okay, the first thing that you absolutely must do, at least weekly, ideally daily, is you need to make progress on multiple areas of life mastery. And there are 6 key areas of life mastery. So you want to write these down and remember these. Okay, the 6 areas of life mastery are your career/mission. Every human being needs to feel, even if they don't have a career, they need to feel some sense of a mission, some sort of a purpose that is greater than themselves. Number 2, your relationships. Number 3, your finances. Number 4, your health and energy. Number 5, your spirituality. And I know for some of you, you guys are religious or spiritual. Some of you are not. That's okay. I'll explain in a second. And then number 6, your mental health. So here's the thing you want to remember. Progress equals happiness. Progress equals happiness. I have never, ever, ever encountered somebody who comes to me and says, you know, Ty, my career is going great. I really am progressing. I feel like I'm making a lot of headway. I also feel like my relationships are moving forward. They're getting deeper. I've got a lot of friends and a lot of deep relationships with family. My relationship with my spouse is going great. My relationship with my kids is going great. My finances are improving. I'm not quite where I want to be, but I really am moving forward piece by piece, month by month. I got a good plan. I'm taking the right actions. My health is improving. I'm doing everything I can in my power to improve my health and maintain my good health. My health will never be perfect. There are some things out of my control, but I am actively improving my health. What is in control of my health? Number 5, I am also improving my spirituality. And again, there's different variations here, right? So a religious person might say, I'm getting closer to God. I'm praying and I'm going to church and I'm doing all those good things. A non-religious but spiritual person might say, I'm meditating. I'm being mindful. I'm living, I'm being a good person. I am doing my grounding work, whatever it is for them. And then the final one is the mental health. So if someone says, I'm really actively working on my mental health every month, and it's getting better and better and better. I've never had someone who comes to me and says that, and then says, I am anxious as hell. Okay, it just doesn't exist. Because remember, anxiety only occurs when there are unmet expectations. And so the key to lasting success, peace, and happiness is to just be making progress. You do not have to have all of these areas at a 10 out of 10 satisfaction. But I promise you, if you really truthfully feel like you are inching forward on each of those areas, the anxiety is going to stay out of your life. Okay, now there are a couple other things you need to have in mind, but this is one of the key parts of the final phase. So all you really got to do is the following. You need to score each of those areas on a 0 to 10 scale. How satisfied are you currently? Number 2, you need to come up with a very specific vision of what would a 10 out of 10 look like in each of those areas. And I recommend the SMART goals framework. So make sure that as you define what a 10 out of 10 would look like in each of those areas, that you make it specific, measurable, actionable, reasonable, and time defined. Okay, those are going to be the 5 key qualities that you want to make sure that it's there. So for example, for your health and energy, you wouldn't want to just say, I want to be healthier. What does that mean? That doesn't make any sense to anything. It's not specific. So you might say, okay, well, the vision for my health to be a 10 out of 10 is that I can run a 5K, I'm 20 pounds lighter, and I can keep up with my grandkids in the backyard. I don't know, something like that. Well, now all of a sudden we've got something specific. We've now got something measurable. We've got something actionable, presumably, right? Like if you were to say, I want to be, I want to develop I want to go back to being able to run as fast as I ran in middle school, and you're like 75 years old. I don't know if that's actionable. That might not be actionable or reasonable. I don't know. But make sure it's actionable. Or here's another one. Like let's say my brother, I remember he broke his arm many years ago. He's never going to have full mobility back in his arm. So he wouldn't want to define his goal as, well, I'd really like to have full mobility back in my arm. That's not actionable. That's just setting yourself up for anxiety. But if he said, well, I really want to have a strong arm, right? I want to make sure that my arm strength is able to curl 45 pounds or something like that. That's actionable. And it might be reasonable. And then time defined. So we would want to say, I want to be able to run the 5K and do all those other things by March 1st, for example. Okay, you got to make sure it checks those 5 boxes. Because if you don't check those 5 boxes, it's going to be very difficult to follow through. Okay, so grade each of those areas 0 out of 10. come up with a vision of 10 out of 10. Number 3, make a plan. Number 4, schedule blocked periods of time on your calendar where you will take action on that plan. Okay, that's the simplest, easiest way that you can do it. So what I set my clients up with is all of those things, but that's basically what you do to get started. If you have a clear vision of the future going how you want it to go, you have a clear plan of how to make it happen, and the plan is actually scheduled on your calendar, now you're in a really good spot. What most people do is they don't even have a vision for their future, and that's not going to work. Number 2, their vision is too unclear and unspecific, and that's not going to work. Your mind is never going to take action on that. Number 3, they don't even have a plan for getting their specific goals obtained, and that's not going to work. Number 4, they do have a plan, but the plan is sitting in a drawer in a desk, and it never gets used, and it never gets on the calendar, and it never gets prioritized. So you got to make sure that all of those are checked. So what we do with our clients is we set them up with a simple little daily planning system, and it doesn't incorporate their whole day. Like, you don't have to revolve your whole day around this stuff, but like what you want is you want to figure out what your specific 10 out of 10 vision is for each of those areas, and it's different for each person. And then what we got to do is we have to design a daily set of habits of how you're going to inch forward towards those things. That's it. So it can be very different. If one person wants to be a bodybuilder, another person just wants to lose 10 pounds, they're going to have very different workout routines. You know what I mean? So, but those are the key things we got to do. And then the final step, I got 2 final steps here. The next step, step 2, in making sure that you have a customized relapse prevention plan, is you got to have a daily conditioning ritual. Okay, just like you brush your teeth to maintain good dental health, just like you exercise physically to maintain good physical health, you need to have a sort of workout, basically, for conditioning your mental health. You got to make sure that all of this work you've done stays where it needs to stay. And there's lots of different variations of that. One of the ones that we recommend and use is what we call a values reinforcement ritual. So basically what that is, sorry, I need some water. Hold on one second. Values reinforcement ritual is where each and every day you imagine the day ahead of you going how you want it to go, and you imagine yourself living in alignment with your chosen values. So let's say that you used to find that life was all about certainty and control and comfort, and it was also all about trying to prove that you were good enough. And now what you've decided you value more is growth and contribution. So what you would do is you would wake up each morning and you would imagine the day ahead of you going that way. So you would literally imagine walking through your daily life where you grow a little bit and you give a little bit. So you would see and feel and imagine all these moments taking place where you're growing and you're giving. And the cool thing about this is that you basically are taking what caused your anxiety in the original first place and you're putting it on its head. Because what caused your anxiety in the first place was your mind constantly rehearsing the future going badly, and now you're going to rehearse your future going how you want it to go in your mind. And what happens is your brain becomes convinced that that's how it's going to go. And as it becomes convinced that that's how it's going to go, that's what ends up happening. Okay, that would be the very simplest version of a daily conditioning ritual. All right. And then I also recommend, as a part of your daily conditioning ritual, set some kind of an intention each day and make sure you're making some progress in at least a few of those areas of life mastery that we talked about before. Okay, and the final absolute step of the final stage is you have to know how to handle curveballs. If you really want to make sure that you prevent relapse and you live without anxiety, the last thing that we got to do is we've got to prepare you for curveballs, because curveballs are going to happen. Curveballs are things like a death in the family, or getting sick, getting laid off, getting in a car accident, okay, something unexpected happening. And what tends to happen when curveballs occur is anxiety patterns develop. People start to overvalue certainty and control, and they start to hyper anticipate what the what ifs might be around the corner. We've got to set you up with an empowering way to deal with curveballs. So the way that you do this, and again, I have like a 11-step process. I'm simplifying it here to just the 3 key big ones. Okay, number 1, in curveball moments, you must define an empowering outcome. Your mind is going to be tempted to zero in on what you fear taking place. And you're going to feel like you're spinning out of control. So what you've got to do in those moments is ask yourself, what is the outcome I want? So for example, when my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer a couple of years ago, that was a curveball. We were not expecting that at her young age. And so we had to decide what is the outcome that we want. And we had to put as much of our focus as possible around that outcome so we could actually feel like we were making progress and we were moving forward instead of just focusing on everything we disliked and everything that we feared. Okay. Number 2, you must derive an empowering meaning from the curveball. This is absolutely critical. This is at the core of what creates healing from trauma also. Sometimes curveballs are traumatic, but part of how you heal from trauma is deriving an empowering meaning from the event. So I remember a gentleman I worked with a couple years ago. He had a really excellent job. He had a really high-paying 6-figure salary. He was laid off suddenly. And he went from making $200,000 a year to making $0. And so he was in a curveball situation. His expenses were very high each month. He didn't really know what to do. It was a big problem for him. And so he was coming up with all these meanings of it's unfair, it's unjust, how could they do this, da 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 da. And I asked him a question that he was not prepared for, which is, why are you grateful that this happened? What gifts is this going to end up creating for you? And he was like, what are you talking about? I said, look, every single curveball has hidden gifts in it. What are going to be the gifts that you eventually are very grateful for that this happened? And he thought about it for a second. He said, you know what? I hated my old job. I said, good. So the universe did you a favor and it gave you a kick in the ass when you weren't willing to give it to yourself. So there's always an empowering meaning. The empowering meaning with my wife's sickness, right, is we created a greater sense of gratitude. It brought us closer as a couple, and we're actually working on ways to be able to take the things that we learned from that journey and use it to serve people like you guys. So there's a lot of empowering meanings from that situation. Okay. The third thing you've got to do besides derive an empowering meaning is focus only on what you can control and what you can influence. Because it's very tempting to focus on what you cannot control and what you dislike and what has happened in the past. And you will end up getting in your head, and when you get in your head, you're dead. You got to re-ground yourself into this moment and take action in this moment to make things better. Okay, so you got to be prepared for a curveball. So again, the 3 big phases. Number 1, we have to basically handle anxiety on the moment-by-moment level. We do this by doing pattern mapping, identifying, interrupting, and replacing each of the little micro patterns, each of the little mental habits your brain has developed over time. Number 2, we've got to deal with the anxiety at the root cause of the issue. We do this by digging in and identifying every single subconscious belief that you have held on to, every unmet expectation that keeps continuously clashing with life. We help you eliminate the ones that are causing you anxiety that will always clash with life, and we help you rebuild a new belief system so that you can actually be the one in charge. You can actually play the game of life and feel like you're winning every day. And then the third and final piece is we have to make sure that we set you up with a very detailed, very customized relapse prevention plan so that you can make sure that you continuously make progress in the 6 areas of life that matter to you, and that you can make sure you are very prepared to handle any curveball events that might occur down the line in the future. And if you do that, you can really truly live an anxiety-free life. You're not going to live a perfect life where you never feel any negativity ever, but you 1000% can get rid of uppercase A anxiety that is repetitive, chronic, limiting, and totally unnecessary. Okay, so I hope you guys found this helpful. If you would like help implementing this, we have had 3 recent graduates this past week, so we have 3 slots that have opened up. If you're interested in applying, just go ahead and put the word apply in the comments. I'll reach out. We'll set up a very quick 10-minute call, see if our process is a good fit for you. If you're accepted, I will work with you personally one-on-one to make sure your anxiety is reduced by a minimum of 75% within 90 days, or I continue to work with you one-on-one for free. And then also, if you don't love our system after using it for a week, you also get a completely free refund, completely full and free refund. So you get to try our system out to make sure that it works for you. But thanks, guys, for being here. I'll see you guys next week. Take care. Bye.